CityCast Boise is sponsored by local author David Tuttle. David Tuttle, a U.S. Army veteran and Reiki master, has completed his most recent book, Soul License, Tips and Tales. It's a spellbinding adventure of a man traveling his spiritual path with guidance from beings of the so-called other dimension. In Soul License, Tips and Tales, Tuttle explores the metaphysical. He shares insights into understanding how to live a peaceful life. Soul License, Tips and Tales is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other booksellers.
Today on CityCast Boise, it's been a cold and snowy March, but what does that mean for our reservoirs? Our Hey Boise newsletter editor Blake Hunter is here to talk to us about how extra snowpack could impact our city's water supply and could even pull us out of a multi-year drought. It's Thursday, March 30th. I'm Emma Arnold, and this is what Boise's talking about. Hi, Blake.
Hey, Emma.
Let's talk about this because March came in like a lion, seems to be leaving like a lion, and it's been so cold and rainy and snowy still. But overall, how did this winter stack up for Idaho?
Yeah, so this March definitely was a pretty wet one for Boise. It's actually the 10th snowiest on record for Boise since records began in the 1890s. And then overall, the winter is just slightly above average. The months of December, January, and February were right around average, and then March kind of pushed us over a little bit. And yeah, I mean, anyone who's been around in Boise during March knows that it hasn't quite been the fun spring month that we wanted it to be, but it overall does hopefully mean good things for the months ahead.
Yeah, last March we were in shorts and t-shirts, and we went camping last March. But we're all trying to see the bright side, right?
Yeah, during Tree Fort, I kept running into people, and we were just like, last Tree Fort. It felt like it was hot, and this Tree Fort, obviously, snow. And during the beginning of March, we did set a record for the most days with snow in a row, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah, and I think we're all trying to obviously, look on the bright side of this, even though we're ready for some warmth. And I'm wondering, does this mean that Idaho could finally move out of the drought?
Yeah, so it is possible. There are a few different factors going into this. So obviously, we're sitting at just above average. Our snowpack's looking good, but if you remember back, we had a pretty dry January. And then before that, Idaho's had a pretty rough drought the last few years. And so this is long-term picture, no one snowy winter is really going to kind of take us out of this, but it does at least look like we're on the incline. If you look at the states around us, they're a bit more spotty. There's kind of more range. Central Oregon is actually in really extreme drought right now, but most of Idaho is, the outlook has at least improved a little bit, but that could definitely change pretty quickly.
And so it's good news, but, we live in the high desert. And isn't drought kind of normal for us? Shouldn't we kind of be used to this at this point?
I mean, yes, we are a desert, but I think one thing that's different is we have seen this drought the last few years, and that kind of fluctuation is normal. But what's happening is that our aquifers are continuously going down, and overall snowpack is decreasing over the years, and we keep also setting records for really, really hot summers. So yes, but also it is getting a little bit more extreme as we kind of all expect with climate change.
Which makes me think of the Treasure Valley's continued sort of, extreme growth that's happening. It seems like water is just going to get more and more crucial. So How is Boise going to handle our water moving forward?
Yeah, that is a big challenge just because, there for a while we were kind of woo, but also sad about Boise being, the fastest growing city in the nation. And that's just kind of going to continue being an issue. The city's kind of water utility plan that started in 2020, being rolled out in 2020 over the next couple decades, prioritizes a lot of reuse. So filtration, but then also just kind of updating infrastructure and things like that is a big issue. We just saw earlier this week Veolia, the water utility company that kind of distributes the majority of Boise and the Treasure Valley's water, is asking to increase how much they charge for their services.
Pretty substantially, right? Like 24%?
24%, which, yeah, I just don't know enough about that to kind of get in the weeds about it, but I know that a lot of people are pretty upset about it.
Oh, luckily, Blake.
Do you have thoughts about this, Emma?
Yeah, so last year they did the same thing and they welcomed comment on it, and they got a ton of letters and testimony and stuff for people being like, this will actually be a huge hardship for me. A 24% increase is, for some people, $8 to $10 a month. But if you have a garden or you're watering bigger trees and stuff, it can be pretty substantial. And a lot of people are on a fixed income, too.
Yeah.
So they already tried this last year, got an overwhelming response of, no, don't do that. And now they're reintroducing it, kind of being like, in my opinion, like, hey, new thought, new idea, when really last year people were very adamantly opposed to that. So
interesting.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I think people are still very against it, but maybe a little more worn out from arguing with other things this year.
Yeah, that's interesting because, as kind of an outsider who has, I just rent a little apartment. I don't have a ton of skin in the game, but it does kind of make sense. Like the value of water would increase the longer we stay in drought, But I also just don't know enough about that to kind of comment on that. I'm not watering a garden. But then the other end of this issue with the Treasure Valley's growth is we can have a lot of conversation. We should have a lot of conversation about how the city uses water, how various cities and communities use water. But 80 to 90% of the Treasure Valley's water, and even more in other parts of the state, like the Magic Valley especially, the vast, vast majority of water goes to agriculture.
Oh, really? Even in Boise?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, even in the Treasure Valley, 80 to 90%. And obviously that's not really going to change a lot. There's still farming expansion going on. And so the city can and should be having conversations about how to reuse water. But that conversation also needs to be happening on the agricultural end of things.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. That's the sound of another sale on Shopify. The moment a business dream becomes reality. Shopify is the commerce platform revolutionizing millions of businesses worldwide. They simplify selling online and in person and provide 24/7 support so you can focus on successfully growing your business. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/offer22, all lowercase.
I know in California and Colorado, they're facing, really huge issues with that. Is Idaho at that point as well?
Yeah, it kind of depends. Obviously, California just has such a huge population, such a huge footprint.
And so much ag, so much ag.
Yeah. Just incredible amounts of water being used. But, they did have a really, really wet winter, so hopefully they'll kind of be eased up there. But yeah, it's definitely an issue that all of the Western U.S. is going to kind of continue having to think about as water just gets more and more valuable. I will say, just generally, our snowpack and reservoirs are looking pretty good for this year. Lucky Peak is just below what the average capacity is for this time of year, and just a tiny, tiny bit below what it was last year. And if you remember last year, we had a really, really rainy spring. So we'll see what happens with that.
That's interesting because I know a lot of people are like, we've gotten so much moisture. How can Lucky Peak be low? But I think people don't realize that the drought from the last couple of years can make for very dry soil. So it'll soak up a lot of the runoff. And so our reservoirs aren't getting as full as maybe they would if we had already had water in a few previous years. I know last year, Arrow Rock Dam, we drove by it on our way to go camping, and it was the lowest I've ever seen it in my life. It was really terrifying. So it is good. It is encouraging to see that those reservoirs fill up, but we probably shouldn't get cocky, huh?
True. Yeah. I guess the optimistic spin on that is that we have had a fairly cold last few months. So, maybe more of the water is just still being held up in the snowpack. But you are right in that the drought contributes to really dry soil. And in other parts of Idaho, that makes a really, really big difference because it takes a lot of water to try to recharge the aquifers, much less the reservoirs. So yeah, it's going to continue to be a big problem here.
Well, before we go, of course, a solid snowpack would be, countered by, and I don't want to put this evil on us, but an extra hot summer again. Do we know what summer's going to look like this year?
Not really. It's kind of hard to predict as of right now. But generally, I will say that the, fire outlook is looking fairly good for most of the western U.S. The South and kind of some of the areas of the Midwest might be in a bit more trouble than we currently seem to be in. But with the last few summers having been so hot and setting so many records and just kind of being persistently staying at like high 90s or low 100s level, that doesn't really look like it's going to change significantly.
That's not the answer I wanted at all.
Yeah.
What about, we reported in the Hey Boise newsletter recently about these prescribed fires. Can you tell me anything about that?
Yeah, so there's several different areas in the Boise National Forest that I think they're supposed to be starting pretty soon, but over the next couple months, they're going to be prescribing fires, particularly around like municipalities, different infrastructure, things like that, and as well as like crucial habitats and watersheds to just try to limit how much wildfire might spread in later months. So obviously they do this every year, but hopefully that can make a big impact.
Well, Blake, as I know I want to be hoping for warmer weather, but it sounds like we should be praying for more rain. So thank you for updating us. And everybody, remember, you got to keep conserving water probably indefinitely. So
yeah, true. We are in a desert. Yep.
Yeah, we are always going to be in a desert. All right. Thanks, Blake.
Thank you.
One more thing before we sign off. The Idaho Press says the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is planning to increase flows on the Boise River in early April. The idea is to let built-up water through now to reduce the risk of spring flooding. So stay away from the river's edge because officials say the water is, quote, deep, cold, and fast at this time of year. That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend? Leave us a review and subscribe to our Hey Boise newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more local stories from around the city. Bye!